Alright, so we've got three new movies by what I guess you could call three notable directors, in one sense or another. And I think I want to start with Wrath of Man, which is the new Guy Ritchie movie where he's finally reuniting with Jason Statham. And what's really interesting about this is that it's not really possibly the kind of movie you would expect when you talk about Ritchie and Statham finally reuniting, because that takes you back to like the Snatch and Lock, Stock days and all that, which are obviously that really specific Ritchie style that he started with. But I don't know about, like, once it kind of gets into the middle, we kind of start doing the fractured timeline thing, then it does. But for a while, I kind of felt like this movie felt particularly un-Ritchie in a lot of ways. I mean, you've still got some of the stuff in there, like the dialogue that might be occasionally a little too clever, clever sometimes in quotes. I mean, it's also the kind of thing that you want when you go into a Ritchie movie, but there's also times, even in the great stuff like Lock, Stock, there's some lines in there that are like it's Ritchie maybe overreaching a little bit for the cool factor, but for the most part it works, and it does work here also. And I didn't know if a lot of that came from the fact that this is actually a remake of a French movie called Cash Truck, I think. Um, and we get this whole opening scene that's really well done and shot in a really interesting way, where we see this whole sort of ambush of this armored truck and this whole robbery, and the whole thing is like shot from inside the car, and like the camera doesn't really move much. Like it's kind of in one place, and it might look in one or two different directions, but it doesn't like move from where it is. And it gives you this really sort of like in the moment feel of it, and that's our opening scene. And then it's worth noting that it's very cool now that we saw Richie kind of go back to form. Like he obviously he had to get a little blockbuster with Aladdin and the stuff like that. But then when the Gentleman came out early last year, it was like here's his return to form. And the reason I have the Gentleman out right now is I actually rewatched it shortly before seeing this, and it was really interesting because I was kind of starting to wonder if it was going to be like I was almost weirdly expecting like a shared universe kind of thing, because I don't know if this is just going to be Richie's new trademark or what. Like, because the movies aren't related, and that's proven by the fact that Eddie Marsan is in both movies playing two different characters. But it's it's like the same style opening credit sequence with like the same font and everything. So it's like I wasn't sure if that's just going to be like Richie's new style now, but it kind of caught me off guard when I saw it. I was like, this feels really familiar, and it's like, oh, he literally just did that. It might just be a new signature or something, because the movies like aren't connected at all as far as I can tell, apart from the Marsan connection, I guess. But what's interesting about it also is talking about it being another fractured timeline thing, is that there's kind of a mystery to it, because Statham is playing a very mysterious character who comes in, and he's new to the whole armor truck thing, and he's working with them, and they're the drivers and the guards and all that. Josh Hartnett's the one that's there, kind of like giving him shit, which may or may not just be a very basic facade when it all comes down to it. And it's only at that point that we see the sort of, and it's interesting. It sounds spoilery to say this, but it's really just the setup, which is when it's very quickly revealed during another attempted robbery that Statham has no trouble just sort of mowing people down all at once. They get they get ambushed by Post Malone and his whole crew of people. Um, which is perfectly fine. I said when Spencer Confidential came out that I am all for Post Malone being in movies. He's only in this for about 30 seconds, but I'm for that. I feel like he's got some sort of presence that actually stands out, even in in 30 seconds of a Guy Ritchie movie. But still, yeah, we see that he's definitely got this sort of dark side to him that nobody sees coming, and then the whole mystery of is basically where is that dark side coming from, and why did he decide to get this job, if there is a specific reason. And like I said, we meet a whole bunch of new characters. Sometimes we're meeting characters that feels like maybe a little too last minute, as far as like the fracture timeline goes and all that. And I can see a lot of people kind of maybe losing their patience. Like even people that are like familiar with Richie, could potentially lose their patience because we kind of go down a number of like rabbit holes as far as these sort of timelines go. But it's like it's that thing where you kind of have to wait for a while, but then ultimately all these rabbit holes have like the same exit, and we eventually get there. Um, and like I don't know how many I could see people not really caring for this, even like Richie fans like of that early Richie era, but it didn't really take me long to get into this. And usually when it doesn't take me long to get into something, especially with something that's kind of got a we're slowly revealing what's going on here kind of thing, at some point you're just kind of waiting for the moment where it's going to like kind of run out of gas or lose its luster or something. Like by the time it gets to the big reveals, you won't necessarily care, and they'll seem kind of flat after all the build up. And while the reveals in it aren't necessarily that revealing, if the movie kind of paused for about 5 or 10 minutes and asked you, so what do you think it goes from here, you could probably figure it out if you just put some of the pieces together. There's one reveal moment in particular that felt quite obvious, pretty much from the get go, more or less. But apart from that, it's really just sort of. It's not necessarily about being ahead of it, because with Richie, it's all about kind of the style and the characters and the stuff like that, and that's really what you're there for when you're at a Richie movie. So I was able to get caught up enough in that some of the story points being kind of obvious didn't really matter, especially when it's leading to some very well executed action scenes. There is an interesting point during the climax where they have like a whole not a point in particular, but the way the climax is set up visually, where they kind of play on the whole cliche of you have the big plan at the end of the movie, and so you see how they have this whole thing mapped out, and they go through the whole thing with like toy cars and all that. And usually when that scene comes into the movie, you know that it's not going to play out like this. Like something's going to go not according to plan, because why would they just show us this and then execute it perfectly? Obviously they're showing it to us so that we can see where it goes wrong. Um, so to avoid the audience kind of getting ahead of it, whether it goes according to plan or whether it doesn't, them showing the blueprint of the plan and the plan itself are happening simultaneously, and we're just cutting back and forth as each thing happens, which I thought was kind of a clever way around that usual cliche. So we've got a number of villains here, but the most notable one is Scott Eastwood. And yeah, I kind of hesitated when I saw his name in the credits, because it's like, what has Scott Eastwood ever brought to a movie so far? The answer is obviously nothing. But here, he actually plays the part relatively well. There was somebody I was trying to compare. I know I felt this way before, where it was an actor that I just really don't care for and has like usually no charisma whatsoever that actually handled a part like this really well. And I can't remember who it is, but that's what Eastwood does here as well. And you can kind of tell that there was a purpose of Richie casting him, because you see Scott Eastwood and you're like, these movies require charisma. How the fuck did Scott Eastwood get in this? But the very first shot we get of him is a close up of his eyes, and it's like I'm getting the vibe that Guy Ritchie really wanted a Sergio Leone shot of an Eastwood in one of his movies, but he has to settle for Scott these days. So, but it is, he does actually bring something to this character where he's the usual villain character in a movie like this, where he's like the sort of loose cannon in a group, and he's the guy he's the Wangro. He's the guy that's gonna not do the job without killing at least 5 people that he doesn't necessarily have to. But he'll try to justify it as I had to. That's part of the job, or whatever. Or something went wrong, so I had to do this to correct it, or something. He's that guy. We've seen that guy like a million times before. But when a movie is well executed enough, especially in a movie like this, that character kind of doesn't get old. Like it's always kind of the moment where you know it's going to kind of kick us off in some sort of direction and set off some other conflict that we eventually have to reach and kind of raise the stakes, particularly at the last minute. And he does that surprisingly well. So I can probably almost say I actually might maybe have liked Scott Eastwood in a movie a little bit. So there's that. Maybe that's the power of Ritchie. I don't know. But on the opposite side of that, though, we do have Andy Garcia in this. And I'm still kind of trying to piece together exactly what his connection was to everything because he's barely there and he's completely wasted. So that was kind of disappointing to counter everything else about how good the cast is here. I would have loved to have seen more of Andy Garcia in a movie like this, but he's barely there and he's like totally wasted. So that's really unfortunate. So it almost seems like it would be like he's like it's almost like this feels like it wouldn't like I don't think there's Rishi had any plans of making this some sort of franchise movie. It wouldn't really make too much sense, but the whole thing where it's like it almost feels like if this were the start of like a franchise, the Andy Garcia's character's purpose would just be that he's going to be important in some later story or something. But with this, I'm imagining being a standalone movie. That's just wasted. Like that's all. Like he's just barely in it, and doesn't really serve too much of a purpose at the end of the day, all things considered. But yeah. So apart from it, kind of maybe feeling like the pace kind of stops a bit when we start doing the going down the different timelines. But it's still really well executed, and it's got really great action scenes. Statham is really great as far as like I've always kind of found him to be kind of a I don't know if I want to say underrated as an actor, but like how he's able to have that presence, but he can also do stuff. I think I kind of talked about this at length when Parker came out because he was so surprisingly charismatic in Parker, and of course that was a couple years before Spy happened, and we got to see him go comedic as well. But this is far from a comedic role. There's one particular scene that might give you a flashback of Handsome Rob from The Italian Job. Not to be confused with Handsome Bob, Tom Hardy's character in Rock and Roll, which is another Ritchie movie, but that's beside the point. Um, yeah, but the way he plays off that mystery and that presence of somebody that just is sort of capable of being an all-out killing machine, and kind of figuring out step by step where this comes from and what his sort of purpose in this whole point of like making himself a cog in this, and where that's coming from. He makes really interesting to watch. So, and like I said, just obviously Richie just knows how to use him. So like it's almost like they were kind of each other's jumping off point early in their careers. So yeah. Long story short, I do really like this. I was gonna debate if I like it as much as The Gentleman or not, but they're really not all that comparable. Like The Gentleman is much more sort of like as dark as it is kind of very upbeat by comparison. Um, Whereas this one is like straight faced for a lot of it, and that might seem like it might take some of the charm out of it, but it really kind of doesn't because Statham's able to find a balance like that, to make it work without it being too, like almost too dark, I guess you could say. So yeah. Um, Now let's go on to In the Earth, which is another horror movie from Ben Wheatley, and this is obviously fresh off him doing the Rebecca remake, which was one of those things where it's like, was he going to be a good fit for that? It turns out he wasn't. So it's like, okay, let's see him get back to kind of what he does best. And that's interesting to pinpoint because his filmography's been very... He definitely has a certain style, but like genre-wise, it's been a very... He has a very interesting filmography, and a very exciting filmography. And like, this is like basically just a straight horror movie, I guess you could say. Very slow burn also. But when you think Ben Wheatley, you think like there'll be these bursts of like gore and really graphic violence that are like not excessive and they're not like persistent throughout, But when they happen, in those rare moments, they hit really big, and you immediately want to look away. That's here. He's got the really twisted sense of humor that we've seen. The first thing I immediately think of when I think of Ben Wheatley's twisted sense of humor, obviously, is Sightseers. And even that finds a way to sneak in occasionally, despite how, on the surface, the movie might look pretty serious about itself. But it's his wicked sense of humor is lurking in there. You may have to look for it, but it's definitely there. um, and I think what might put some people off about this movie, apart from the slow burn, is the fact that it might seem a little, oh, we've been there and done that for like over a year now. The fact that the whole movie was like conceived and written and brought together and filmed in like quarantine, and the fact that it's about a virus outbreak might seem like, oh well, of course they would do that because like everybody's going to try to cash in on this now. But what's interesting about this is that despite those like restrictions and the plot kind of the obvious inspiration, this feels cinematic enough that it easily, I feel like it easily could have been a movie that was like pre-pandemic. Um, I feel like eventually Ben Wheatley would have made this movie, whether all of this happened or not. Eventually, at least in some form. Obviously, also with all that taken into account, you can imagine the cast is very small, so like 4 major players at most. Um, and it's one of those things that's sort of atmospheric immediately, even if it doesn't, even if it takes its time getting to its more, horror-like aspects. Um, it's it's a very basic, plot where it's the whole thing of they have to. There's this character that's unseen for quite some time that's our main character played by Joel Fry here has had potentially some sort of relationship with in the past, and she's got this whole potentially got this whole equipment, and they can use this stuff to find out that if there's some sort of cure that they can somehow put together for this virus that's broken out. And a lot of that is kind of seemingly intentionally vague because it's not extremely important for a large portion of the movie, which might sound sort of another thing that might sound a bit off-putting. But no, it's really all about the the atmosphere and beyond where we eventually get. Like it's kind of hard to say without saying. Like I'm not even sure what would be saying too much at this point, because there is a large portion of the middle that's more or less most of the movie where it does kind of turn into a hostage situation with a crazed person that they run into in the middle of the woods. But like everything kind of branches off into the direction that we're leading to. It's one of those cases where at the beginning, where it's kind of all dialogue, things are constantly being dropped that are probably going to be some form of foreshadowing or setting up stuff that's going to get us to a certain point when we get like closer to our climax. But in the meantime, even before the whole hostage thing happens, and it's just them wandering through the woods for a while, and I know that's another thing too, where if there's one sort of section of horror that puts off even many horror fans, it's the slow burn movie where people are just in the woods. I get it, but a lot of them do find a way to work, even though many of them are also shit. Like in Bobcat Goldthwait's Willow Creek is a movie I don't think many people actually liked, that I recommend any chance that I get. And obviously Blair Witch comparisons are inevitable, but this isn't like a found footage thing or anything like those are. But it is a, walking through the woods and eventually freaky shit will happen movie at the same time. But and for a while there, it's mostly just like just the sound design is extremely well done through the whole movie. But if you're talking like just sort of the woods scenes before anything really takes off, you get moments like him hearing an animal in the night just sounds like a straight up scream that like wakes him out of his sleep, and it's that thing where it's like you kind of question what you're hearing exactly. Like you can identify like, oh, that must have just been an animal or something, but then your mind starts to wonder like, is that what it was, or is that, or was it more human? I don't know. And a lot of that is just sort of stays ambiguous, which is nice and effective, even if, like I said, it's the kind of thing that might piss some people off depending on how they go into a movie, I guess. But another thing that I thought was quite well done about this was the lighting is interesting because it could seem really like sort of drab, just like by principle of its story. But when the shit kind of starts hitting the fan a little bit, and then definitely when it gets to a certain point, when it basically goes into full 2001 trippy territory at some point, which is kind of the point where it kind of started to lose me a little bit, kind of in the last third. Um, but there's stuff like as far as the lighting and like the color of it that just kind of has unexpected bursts. Like when this whole hostage situation happens in the middle and they go inside of a tent, so it's almost like it's an entirely different world in there just by the way that it's lit. When you compare it to like the darkness of the woods. And it kind of sets off like they've almost walked into like another world of sorts, and then that's when like it goes into another direction dramatically in horror or whatever you want to call it. And the fact that it's the way the tension eventually like really rises, and it's like just when you reach those tense moments when like they're at their absolute peak is when you might get those little bursts of Wheatley's like really fucked up sense of humor. And it's like there's a surprising amount of balance to it. And another thing that is kind of surprising is I can actually see this when I was talking about it being they're walking through the woods movie for a while, is when people don't like those movies, a lot of the time they'll say it's because nothing happens or whatever they say. But what's interesting about that is I wouldn't be surprised if people brush this off as a nothing happens kind of movie. But I frequently found myself saying, I don't know what the fuck is going to happen next. It's like once it reaches a certain point. Well, even really when they just started, even when they were just walking through the woods, there's just enough unsettling factors in there that I was still wondering, like, where is it going and what is, and it's not like the impatient, is this going to go somewhere, but it was like I could sense we're definitely going somewhere, but where, and that's the feeling that you want. So, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are, especially because there are a lot of horror. I don't want to be like condescending or anything, but there's like a lot of horror fans that are like the straight, like the horror fans that are looking for the more formulaic kind of thing, where it's to the point where like when stuff like Robert Eggers' movies come out or something, like when The Witch first came out or It Comes at Night or something, there was the whole thing where it's like I said, I don't mean to sound like pretentious or like I'm above anybody, but it's like something that I've come to learn is a really good sign for any kind of horror like this is if you go to IMDb, and when you go to IMDb, a 5 or a 6 seems low, but if you go to IMDb and you see a horror movie that has somewhere between 5 and 6, that usually means it's probably really interesting and maybe a bit experimental. And there's definitely something in there worthwhile. Even though it might look low, it's usually because of that it gets there. Because a lot of people go into stuff like when everybody, like, It Comes at Night was in my top 10 of its year in 2017, and I have the luxury of not watching trailers. So I was surprised when everybody seemed to hate It Comes at Night, but the only thing that I heard that people hated about It Comes at Night was that the trailers lied to them, basically, which is not the movie's fault. So this might be one of those. I don't know what the marketing looks like. Yeah, so I'm all for the stuff like this. If there's stuff about it that I kind of wasn't into, it would be some of the editing is like really erratic, and it does this thing where like when it sort of transitions, it does like quick cuts of like black, which are kind of jarring, and they kind of and as far as like an immersion factor, which a lot of people really like to have, that's it's kind of hard to have that immersion factor when the scene transitions are like cuts to black that are happen really quickly. So that was kind of throwing me off whenever that, because it happens frequently. Um, and if you're one of those people that has like a problem with strobe effects, it's gonna get really bad for you kind of in that middle portion when it starts to go. And like I said, it's almost like it's trying to do the 2001 thing almost. But you have to deal with that stuff. Like I said, there's still a lot of stuff that there's a lot of those build up to moments, and when they hit, they like really hit. And like I said, that's usually where the gore factor comes in, where it's not there very often, but when it is, it's they're going for the fullest impact as far as gore can go. So, which is like the Wheatley style. So, yeah. So if you're really into his stuff, that's not Rebecca. I feel like this falls into that quite well. Obviously, it might not seem as energetic as something like Free Fire or something like that, but it's. I didn't really care for High Rise either, and obviously everybody's go to would be, Kill List or something. But it's you can it like I said, it feels like he's trying to hit a different genre with every movie. Um, but you can always really tell that it's him. And I love when directors can kind of have a signature like that doesn't take away and doesn't feel redundant necessarily. And I feel like he's really captured that. So we can forgive Rebecca for now, and yeah. And I was praising the sound a little bit ago. It's also another movie with a synth score. And it's trying to do like the kind of 70s thing where you can always tell which era they're going for when you can see the copyright date under the title. And it's like, that's something that I kind of feel, I guess, immune to at this point. But here I feel like it worked just fine because it's not like overbearing about wanting to have some sort of 70s feel, apart from when it gets like, trippy in kind of its last third, where, like I said, it was kind of losing me there. But just the overall product works, and I think it's going to sit in the mind really well, and kind of age well in that way. So, yeah, I'll be curious to see what I think of it in like maybe a week or a month's time or something. Which I don't imagine it getting any worse in the mind. It should only get better and more kind of. Eventually, it's the kind of movie where you'll want to like suddenly revisit it when you might watch it and say like, well, I only need to see that once, but then like sometime later it'll just be like, I just randomly have an urge to like really revisit that, and usually it's like a really big craving really suddenly too. I can see this being one of those, so we'll see what happens with that. But just thankfully he was able to bounce back after Rebecca. We just talked about Statham with Wrath of Man, so I guess it's worth noting that I don't know if this is going to eventually fall through, I could see that happening, but supposedly his next movie being the sequel to The Meg. I was telling a friend, I don't know if that's like, if I should mourn his career, if this is him like saying, I need money for my smaller projects, or if The Meg 2 should be at the top of all of our most anticipated lists. It's gonna be one of the two. It's gonna be his paycheck movie, or he's gonna do some really fucked up shit with it in a really great way. It's really hard to tell. But I'm kind of excited to find out, honestly. So let's go ahead and end on a very different movie, which is Here Today, which is a movie directed by Billy Crystal, which he has not done very often, and seemingly for good reason. I haven't seen his baseball movie, which is apparently really good, but I have seen Mr. Saturday Night and Forget Paris, and Forget Paris is very interestingly titled because I couldn't tell you a damn thing that happens in it. And Mr. Saturday Night was also pretty forgettable apart from David Paymer's performance. You could tell it was almost like an Oscar bait sort of thing. And I could probably see this being an Oscar bait sort of thing also, depending on how diluted the person is. So, let me just say that I am a fan of Billy Crystal overall, for sure. I can imagine many people aren't. But he tends to have missteps, and they're apparently usually when he directs a movie. And even with all the time he's had to come up with another project, that still shows. So apparently this one comes from a short story, and he and the author of that short story co-wrote it. And it's immediately got that Billy Crystal sense of humor to it. where he is naturally he is an aging comedy writer, because of course he is, for a show, for like a sketch show, a really fucking bad sketch show, and I couldn't tell through the whole movie if the point was that the show was bad or not. I honestly couldn't tell, because the you could tell when the jokes were supposed to be bad, but then there were also times where I couldn't tell if it was like, because the idea is that he's still a quality writer and he's basically better than the younger writers because humor is going to shit or whatever. And but I honestly couldn't tell because all the jokes are shit, whether they're coming from him or the show itself or whatever. Um, so that's not necessarily a good sign, but you can tell Billy Crystal humor from a mile away, especially if you've watched him host the Oscars. But like there's a moment where it's like, and they're not like dreadfully unfunny. They're like dad jokes, I guess. When he in the first scene where he and Tiffany Haddish meet, she's got a picture of him and she's looking for him, but it's like kind of a picture where it's like it's almost looks like it's from like his thermal from the train era or something, like the late '80s. So she doesn't recognize him at first by the picture, and his response is, "Oh yeah, that picture was taken on the Mayflower." It's like that's just such a fucking Billy Crystal line, and I don't even know if that's a bad thing. Where it's like it's not that funny of a joke at all, but almost like it's there's something charming to the fact that his humor hasn't really changed. Like it's that like there's an innocence to his humor, kind of. Um, I know the Sammy Davis Jr. stuff notwithstanding, but you get what I mean as far as lines like that. But then it's like the whole appeal of the movie is, I think, supposed to be the contrast, where you've got the old, what represents the old classic humor, and then the new, more like boisterous humor, I guess. Hence the pairing of him with Tiffany Haddish. So, who have I have expressed many, many times that it's just really not worked with. Like, even with, Girls Trip, the thing that, like, really set her off, I just couldn't. That whole character just kind of felt derivative anyway, and it's kind of a character she just never left, so, as you can see, not much has evolved as far as my personal feelings towards whatever humor that is that she has. So, naturally, 10 minutes into this movie, we've got the allergic to shellfish joke. Remember the scene in Hitch? It's that again. Like Hitch was what, 2004, somewhere in there. So Hitch is like 17 years old, and 10 minutes into this movie, we're doing the allergic to shellfish joke. It's been a joke that's been around for fucking ever, but Hitch is just the first thing I think of, especially in this sort of setting, like this light comedy setting. And it doesn't really let up as far as what humor here is ancient and all of that, and it's basically relying on Tiffany Haddish doing her Tiffany Haddish thing, or Billy Crystal doing his Billy Crystal thing, and then the movie's just kind of supposed to live off of that. And it's like if you come to this for these people to do their thing, you'll probably be fine. But the movie also desperately wants to be a drama, which is usually the death knell for most comedies. So, I'm not saying Billy Crystal's trying to be a certain movie, because with productions lining up, there's really no way this could have happened. It's obviously pure coincidence, but his character's got dementia. And so, these days, you're immediately going to think, alright, well, we just had The Father, which pretty much did the absolute best thing you could possibly do with this material. So what is a Billy Crystal comedy drama, 2021 Billy Crystal, by the way, gonna do with this material now? And The Father, this is not. In case you had to be told that. But in the meantime, we have there's stuff here where you could see where this might work. Like, he's basically trying to write, I guess, some sort of memoir or something about his family. And his kids feel really distant because of something traumatic that happened in their past that has to do with the fact that their mother is dead. And they do some stuff here that seems like that kind of works at the start, where it's like we're gonna have flashbacks of Billy Crystal and how he met his wife, and then how they sort of dated at the time, and then it eventually led to them falling in love and getting married and doing that whole thing. And so it's like, please tell me they're not going to try to de-age Billy Crystal or something, or maybe they can cast young Billy Crystal or something. But it's like, what can you do creatively with the flashback stuff? So without having to worry about that. So all the flashbacks are from his point of view. So it's just like them dating and falling in love and all that, but we're looking at it like through his eyes, so it's just her in the shot. And it's like, okay, that's a good way to do it. Only trouble is that these flashbacks end up taking up a lot of the movie. So when it's like when you see that as like just a flashback, you're like, oh, that's a clever thing to do. But then it gets a little more awkward as it goes and really loses its luster when so many scenes now are just his dead wife, the young version of his dead wife from his point of view, and it's and it just after a while it was like it was a good idea that eventually ran out very quickly because they got so devoted to it for some reason. And then there's another thing, and I really hate to be all cynical and shit, but there's movies that you can just tell that their purpose is to be a feel-good movie. And if you've seen enough feel-good movies, you can... It just looks like there's... It's almost like they're trying so hard to be sincere. Eventually there's just an insincerity in it, if that makes any sense. Where it's like for instance, we can tell when their friendship, when they're starting to hit it off, he and Tiffany Haddish, is when we're supposed to be all smiles and think this is the greatest thing ever. Like, this is so charming and so sweet and so funny and all that. And a lot of this is handled by having Tiffany Haddish do her Tiffany Haddish thing, and the camera just lingers on Billy Crystal, like, smiling. It lingers for a long time just on Billy Crystal smiling. It's like, oh yeah, because that's what people do in feel-good movies. They just smile for long periods of time, which is actually pretty awkward when you think about it. Like, just try to smile for, like, the next 60 seconds unbroken, and see how long it takes you to feel really fucking weird and deranged. But that's what Billy Crystal looks like whenever he's around Tiffany Haddish, because it's a feel-good movie. So it's like, the whole idea is, if Billy Crystal just smiles into the camera enough, it's supposed to be contagious to the audience. And it's like, because Tiffany Haddish is not going to make me smile. So it's like, it's up to Billy Crystal to help me get there. And the way he's going to help me get there is to just kind of do it himself. And it's supposed to be like, oh, well, he finds her charming. I guess we, the audience, do too. Let's run with it. That's basically how feel-good movies work. And most of them are that lazy about it. And just hoping to God that the little effort they put in is going to be enough to make it work. But talking about the movie's laziness, there's another factor that comes into the feel-good movie, and that is when you run out of ideas, which is going to be very early and very quick, just make the characters sing. Talk about this bullshit every fucking time a Melissa McCarthy comedy comes out, and we're already back to it. Yeah, they make singing Tiffany Haddish's profession. That's how they're trying to sneak it in here, not so subtly. So it's like, yeah, we get like 3 long filler scenes that are just Tiffany Haddish singing really upbeat and energetic. And it's like, yes, this is what feel-good movies do. It's basically like feel-good movie cheating. It's like, yeah, just put a song in it, and if they recognize the song, then that's doing the work for us. We don't have to do jack shit. We don't have to make this character likable in any way whatsoever, as long as she's singing a song. That'll make her seem upbeat and relatable or some shit. I don't know. That's what a lot of this movie is feel-good movie cheating, I guess you could call it that. So, and like I said, when it's not doing that, it's trying to pull as hard as it possibly can at the heartstrings. There is another Billy Crystal movie. Actually, Roger Ebert put this into words in kind of a brutal way, but also kind of a perfect way. It was about, I swear to God, another Billy Crystal movie. It was Father's Day, the one he did with Robin Williams. And Ebert really went after that movie. And let me see if I can find that damn quote here. But it's the whole thing where he's talking about how comedians seem to really want to do drama like a lot. Like there's always going to be that dramatic side to them that they want to let out. But the thing is they, especially when he's directing, I think is the problem, because obviously comedians can do drama very well in a number of instances you can probably name. I didn't mark this, so I'm looking for this shit on the spot, and probably not going to find it now. But that whole thing of how that can work, but it's just really, really trying so hard to go in as serious of a direction as possible. And it's just not... Like I said, that whole thing where it's... I get wanting to be sincere, and like if it was so... Like, if it was trying to be cynical, that might also be something you could go after it for. But it almost feels like there'd be more truth in it if it was more cynical, and there'd be more of, like, kind of a bite to it. But it's trying just so hard to be so... Like, it's wanting so hard to be liked that it's almost like kind of a begging dog. And I don't know how else you can handle that. But that's... And I think Mr. Saturday Night had the same problems. Like when I was saying that Mr. Saturday Night was trying to be, like, you could really tell it was trying to be Oscar bait, and it's hilarious that David Payne was the one that actually got through. But it usually ends up being, like I said, I don't want to be mean, but it becomes really embarrassing almost. But it's... I don't know. Here it is. I just happened to look down at it. It's talking about how it's building up that the movie's a comedy, and this really, all-out comedy, and Robin Williams is doing his thing, Billy Crystal's doing his thing, and then Ebert says, will the movie get all smooshy at the end with the kind of cheap sentimentality comedians are suckers for because they all secretly think they embody a little of Chaplin? That's it, right there. So, like I said, it sounds mean and so cynical, but that's how I come away from this movie. So, and it's got these moments in it that you can they're just so fake. Like the moment when he goes off live on the air during the sketch show, and he just goes on the guy because he doesn't like the guy's delivery. Like, it's a running thing where the guy puts emphasis on this instead of this in a word, and it drives Billy Crystal crazy. So he just storms onto the stage and he says, no, you gotta say it like this. Like, look at the cue cards, it goes like this. And this is that scene in the movie, in all movies, where the directors are saying, no, don't cut to commercial, stay on him, this is the best live TV of all time. And it's just Billy Crystal throwing a little bit of a tantrum. And everybody's going crazy. The director is literally, like, out of her seat and flinging her arms everywhere, because this is the most exciting thing that has ever been on live TV in the history of fucking ever. And you can just tell the way it's blowing itself up. And it's like, you just kind of look at it, and it's like, you can literally see through the director character, the movie itself flailing in desperation. To be liked and to get the audience caught up in something. And it's just so fucking flat. And that's what, and then it goes into this really desperate thing where you can tell somebody like Billy Crystal wrote it, because they try and throw out every single social media thing after that scene, where it's like, oh, that little tiny tantrum he kind of threw about emphasizing on the right words, the right parts of words. It's like, Twitter, these are actual lines, Twitter is blowing up. It's all over Instagram. All that shit. They go through like every single thing, like every single outlet of social media. They try to squeeze all the references in. And this eventually, I swear to God, reaches a point where the guy says, I just want you to know Billy Crystal's character name, I think Charlie. I want you to know how much that meant to me, what you just did. So I tweeted this. And he reads him a fucking tweet he wrote about him. And of course, it ends in a hashtag, because you just know Billy Crystal could not get through writing the script without putting the fucking word hashtag in it. Because that's what's happening now, according to old-ass comedians. I love Billy Crystal, by the way. I want that to be absolutely clear. But this is the kind of shit that happens. So, I also, another thing that I really just hate to do, quite honestly, is go off on child actors or actresses. I know I've done it plenty of times, but it's like, especially when they're like old enough to know that they might be really trying, instead of being conducted by a parent off screen or something. They might be at the age where they're really trying to act. Billy Crystal's got a granddaughter in this movie, and the performance that this young actress gives, that may very well grow up into a talented actress, is not helping the scenes that she's in. And she's in some of the big dramatic scenes at the end, and it's not the whole. I don't. It's yeah. When I say comedy tries to be drama, you can probably see the whole ending of this movie up to this point, and the really forced conflicts and the very sudden resolutions that just have no emotional payoff whatsoever. Yeah. And obviously, it goes without saying, the tone is all over the fucking place. That just goes without saying, I imagine. But, yeah. I guess if there's one thing that I kind of liked, is that the fact that the relationship between him and Tiffany Haddish is, like, platonic the whole time is kind of a breath of fresh air. Like, obviously they, hint and, like, flirt and shit, but it's a whole platonic thing, which is kind of nice. But apart from that, I can see where and once again, it's one of those age-old concepts of saying, well, like, it's like the Odd Couple thing. Like I said, the Odd Couple thing has just happened so many times, and we know both of these people's senses of humor so well. It's like, you could just look at the poster, and you know this movie. That's it, really. So, not all of this was not even necessary. Just look at the poster, and that's the movie. And if that's your thing, that's your thing, and if not, you can imagine. So, I guess we will end this here. I'm doing another set of 3 movies. I don't know which one's going to go out first, but this is either... If this one's out, then obvious. If this one is out second, then obviously I've already done Those Who Wish Me Dead and The One in the Window and Mitchell's vs. the Machines. But if not, that'll be what the next one is. So until that, I think that's it.